Ask anyone who's eaten a deer they shot themselves, and they'll tell you the same thing. It tastes different, richer, somehow more real than anything you'd pull off a grocery store shelf. And it's not just in their heads, or at least not entirely. Millions of people swear the same thing every single year. Wild turkey beats store turkey, elk beats beef. A trout pulled straight from a cold mountain stream and cooked over a fire tastes nothing like the one sitting on ice at the supermarket. So, what's actually going on here? Is this just nostalgia talking, or is there something happening at a chemical level that actually changes the meat? Let's start with the moment of death, because that matters more than you think. When a farmed animal is slaughtered, it's usually herded through unfamiliar spaces, surrounded by other stressed animals, and killed in a facility built for speed and volume. That stress floods its body with adrenaline and cortisol right before it dies. Its muscles tense, its heart races, and all of that has a direct and measurable effect on the meat. Stressed muscle burns through its glycogen stores fast. Glycogen is what eventually turns into lactic acid after death. And lactic acid is what gives meat its proper pH, its tenderness, its flavor. An animal that dies calm has plenty of glycogen left to convert. An animal that dies terrified has already burned through most of it. The result is meat that's tougher, paler, and duller in flavor. Scientists actually have a name for the extreme version of this. It's called PSE meat. Pale, soft, and exudative. It happens constantly in commercial pork and poultry, and it's a direct result of stress hormones flooding the body at the moment of slaughter. Now, compare that to a deer taken cleanly out in the woods. One shot and it's over in seconds. No trailer ride, no holding pen, no other panicking animals around it. Hunters have known this for generations without ever knowing the biochemistry behind it. A clean, quick kill produces better meat. It's the same reason experienced hunters obsess over shot placement. Not just for the sake of the animal, but because a bad shot means a longer death, more adrenaline flooding the system, and meat that suffers for it in texture and taste. But the moment of death is only half the story. The other half happened over the animal's entire life. Think about what a farmed cow actually eats. Corn, soy, grain. The same feed day after day, formulated for exactly one purpose: fast, efficient growth. A wild deer eats none of that. It's grazing on acorns, wild grasses, bark, berries, mushrooms, whatever the season and the landscape offer. Its diet is constantly shifting with the land around it, and that diet gets stored directly in the muscle and fat of the animal. It shows up on your plate whether you're looking for it or not. Nutritionists have documented this for years. Wild game consistently carries more omega-3 fatty acids and less saturated fat than grain-fed meat, simply because the plants a wild animal eats are built differently than a feedlot ration. This is also where that distinct gamey flavor comes from, the one people either love deeply or genuinely can't stand. Wild animals produce certain fatty acids in their fat and muscle tissue that come almost entirely from the specific plants they browse on throughout their lives. Deer, elk, and other wild ruminants build up flavor compounds in their fat that grain-fed livestock never develop, because grain-fed livestock never eat the plants that create them in the first place. That sharp, earthy edge you taste in venison isn't a flaw or a sign of bad meat. It's a flavor written directly by the forest the animal spent its whole life moving through. Then there's the muscle itself, and this part is easy to overlook. A wild animal moves constantly. It's running from predators, covering miles of terrain every single day, working muscle groups a feedlot animal barely touches. That kind of relentless, varied movement builds a fundamentally different kind of muscle fiber, denser, leaner, packed with more myoglobin, which is the protein responsible for meat's deep red color and a massive part of its overall flavor. More movement means more myoglobin. More myoglobin means a deeper, more intense, more complex taste. A feedlot animal standing in a small, confined pen for most of its life simply never develops that. The muscle stays soft, pale, and mild by comparison. You can see this same effect play out dramatically with birds. A wild pheasant or wild turkey spends its days walking miles across open fields, flying in short bursts, constantly alert and on the move. A farmed turkey, by contrast, is often bred to grow so large so fast that some strains can barely walk by the time they're slaughtered, let alone fly. That radical difference in activity changes the muscle in a very literal, very physical way. Wild birds tend to have darker, denser breast meat packed with far more flavor. Farmed birds are bred specifically for soft, mild, uniform meat that cooks predictably and looks exactly the same on every single plate. That's not an accident. It's the entire point of how they were raised and what they were designed for. Now here's where it gets even more interesting, because this same pattern shows up underwater too, and in some ways it's even more dramatic than what happens on land. Take salmon. A wild salmon spends years swimming thousands of miles through open ocean, fighting strong currents, chasing prey, then migrating upstream against powerful rapids just to spawn. A farmed salmon spends its entire life in a crowded net pen, barely swimming more than a few feet in any direction, fed a steady diet of processed pellets. The difference in muscle structure alone is enormous. Wild salmon builds dense, tightly packed muscle fiber from years of constant swimming. That's part of why it holds together so much better on a grill and has that firmer, more satisfying bite people notice immediately the first time they try it. Then there's color, which is actually one of the more surprising and revealing parts of this whole story. Wild salmon gets its deep orange-red color naturally from eating krill and small crustaceans packed with a pigment called astaxanthin. Farmed salmon doesn't have access to any of that inside a pen. Without it, its flesh would actually come out pale gray by default. To fix this, farms simply add synthetic astaxanthin directly into the feed, and the specific shade of pink is chosen off a printed color chart before the fish is even raised. That salmon pink you associate with freshness and health is, more often than not, a color selected from a catalog, rather than a natural result of where the fish actually lived and what it actually ate. Diet changes the flavor underwater just as much as it does on land. A wild trout pulled from a cold, fast-moving mountain stream has spent its life eating insects, smaller fish, and whatever the current carries past it. That diet shapes a cleaner, brighter, more complex flavor. A farmed trout raised in a controlled pond, eating the same formulated pellets every single day, tends to taste flat and uniform. There's nothing shifting in its environment to shift the flavor of its meat, and freshness plays an outsized role with fish specifically, more than with almost any other kind of meat. Fish begins breaking down faster than red meat the moment it dies. A trout cooked over a campfire an hour after being pulled from the water is working with a completely different biological starting point than a fillet that's been shipped, stored on ice, handled twice, and sitting in a display case for a week before it reaches your plate. Some of what people are actually tasting when they insist wild fish is better isn't purely about wild versus farmed at all. It's about 1 hour old versus 1 week old. That distinction alone would make almost anything taste better. So at this point, it seems settled. Wild meat and wild fish taste better because the animal died calmer, ate a richer and more varied diet, moved constantly throughout its life, and usually ends up on a plate much faster after death. Case closed. Except it's not quite that simple. And this is where it gets genuinely interesting, because a significant part of what people describe as better isn't purely chemical at all. Psychologists have studied this effect carefully in food and in human behavior more broadly. It's called the effort heuristic. The more work you put into obtaining something, the more your brain rewards you when you finally get to experience it. A steak you grabbed in 15 minutes at a grocery store carries none of that weight behind it. A fish you hooked yourself after 2 hours of casting in the cold, or a deer you tracked through the woods for an entire morning using skills you've built over years, carries an enormous amount of it. Your brain isn't just tasting the meat at that point. It's tasting the whole hunt, the whole day on the water, the cold air, the silence, the patience it took to get there. There's also the simple matter of context. Wild game and wild fish are almost always eaten fresh, often within days, sometimes within hours of the animal's death. They're rarely sitting in a warehouse or distribution center for weeks the way commercial meat regularly does before it even reaches a store. Freshness alone changes flavor and texture dramatically, completely separate from anything to do with stress hormones or myoglobin or diet. So the honest answer sits somewhere in the overlap of all of it. The biology is real. Less stress at death genuinely changes the chemistry of the meat. A wild diet genuinely builds different fat profiles and different flavor compounds both on land and in the water. More movement over a lifetime genuinely changes texture and myoglobin content. None of that is myth or storytelling. It's measurable and documented. But so is the story your brain tells you while you're eating it. The cold morning before dawn, the silence deep in the woods, the sudden pull on the line right before a fish breaks the surface. None of that shows up under a microscope. None of it will ever appear on a nutrition label, but it's sitting right there on the plate anyway, mixed in with everything else, inseparable from the taste itself. Wild meat doesn't just taste like a different animal. It tastes like everything it took to get it there.